do you want to hit the, oh, that's got to hit continue on my side, sorry. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us here. We're really excited. This is our first meeting that we've kind of opened to the public for anyone to join. And we did so because it's clearly such an important topic that we want to discuss. And we think that really everyone should be hearing and also providing input into this conversation. So we specifically want to thank the Black Biomechanists Association and the Latinx in the biomechanics community for joining us and for leading the conversation, which will be led by Kayla and Dr. Bell later. Like I said, we thought about having this meeting because in this day and age, especially if you're in America, you can't help but think about racial tension that's being created and how we can potentially help as allies. And so we, like I said, wanted to facilitate this conversation and hopefully learn from some of our colleagues how we can be better allies and better help our students in this day and age. So next slide, please, Anna. The agenda for today's meeting is pretty straightforward. Like our normal meetings, we'll have an hour keynote. As I said, it'll be led by Dr. Bell and Kayla, and they're going to recap some of the things that were covered in the ASB East conference, I think about 2 weeks ago. In the middle of their keynote, we are going to ask all members and everyone participating in this video chat to take about 5 to 10 minutes to actually test their own implicit bias. I think one of the biggest barriers in this conversation is it's really easy to think that we're not the problem, that it might actually be, you know, the boogeyman down the road who is causing these racial issues in research spaces. But this implicit bias test, which was created by Harvard, actually allows you to kind of look inward and say, what biases do I not even realize I have that are contributing to how I treat other people? Then we'll have a breakout room to discuss our results and what we found from that implicit bias test. There will be a closeout of the keynote, so we'll all come back together. And then just like every meeting, there will be individual breakout rooms for 30 minutes or longer if you guys feel you want it to continue longer. The breakout rooms for this meeting, there are just 3. One will be led by the Black Biomechanists Association, specifically focusing on microaggressions. One will be led by the Latinx and Biomechanics community to create room for Latinx researchers to discuss their experiences. And the final breakout room, which will be held in the main Zoom link, is discussing ways that we can be better allies and create a safer research place, like I said, for our colleagues and for our students. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Bell and Kayla for our keynote address.
Hey guys, I'm going to share my screen so we can get started with the presentation. Erica, you can introduce yourself if you want to in the meantime.
Hello, I am Dr. Erica Bell. I am actually a postdoc currently working at the Mayo Clinic with Dr. Christian Zhao in the Assistive and Restorative Technology Lab. So that's me, Kayla.
And I'm Kayla Seymore. I'm a PhD student at the University of Delaware, and I'm working with Dr. Karin Silbernagel in the Muscle Tendon Lab.
And our other co-founder who might be here, but who is not presenting today is Dr. Matt McCullough. And he is at NCA&T, where he's an associate professor among many, many other things. So I guess we just kind of wanted to start out briefly, just describing what the Black Biomechanists Association is before we get into what we want to talk about today. Basically, this was kind of a vision that was had about, I would say, multiple years ago. Me and Matt originally tried to get this up and running at one point, more so just as an interest group, just because we realized as we continued to go to a lot of our annual biomechanics meetings that it was really hard to identify other Black biomechanists that were around. And so I always say the story of, like, with me and Kayla, we went to grad school together at East Carolina University, but then she took a job out in Boise State. So we were the whole US apart. We were on opposite coasts. So the one time that we actually do get to come together is usually at the annual ASB meeting. And so we always know that we have that connection point. But I feel like for a lot of other Black scientists, specifically in the biomechanics community, that's not always a thing. They don't always know that they're going to see another face that looks like them in that space. So it was important that we just kind of made ourselves a little bit more visible and to provide some more resources, and we can get into some of those things. But this was something we tried to start about 5 years ago, Matt and I think we talked to maybe like one person. So it was great. But we were just glad that we finally got to really debut it this year at the virtual ASB meeting. And it's really just taken off a lot quicker than we thought it was going to, but we really just appreciate all the support. So with that, I'm going to let Kayla tell you about our mission and objectives.
Yeah, so our group, as Erica said, has a couple different reasonings why we began it, but ultimately moving forward, we have some mission or a mission and some objectives. So the mission up top is to uplift and enrich Black biomechanists in their academic and professional careers. And then the objectives following would be to provide a supportive environment to discuss the challenges, needs, and interests of Black biomechanists, to provide resources that encourage visibility, increase engagement, and empower Black biomechanists, and lastly, to aid in the biomechanics community's effort to becoming more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so fulfilling those objectives, we also, as an organization, are encouraging allyship. And so we just want to put out this statement and make it known that non-Black scientists are, or will not be, excluded from the organization for membership or participation. So we welcome and encourage anyone who wants to be a part of the organization, even if you're, not a Black scientist or don't identify as a Black scientist. We encourage your allyship. And in addition to your direct contribution, if you're not able to support any of our initiatives directly, you can also have indirect support by increasing awareness of our endeavors. And also that will help broaden the biomechanics community a little bit more. So have it not be so much of an echo chamber for ourselves, but to spread our objectives and initiatives out towards the broader biomechanics community. And lastly, we just want to top it off by saying that all the decisions and actions that are going to be taken by members of the organization will align with our objectives for the betterment of Black biomechanists and also the diversity, equity, inclusion of the biomechanics community. And so everything we do kind of comes full circle in that we want to make this a supportive and open space for Black biomechanists, but we also have goals and initiatives to push and drive diversity.
So since, I guess, starting this organization, like I said, we've had a lot of support that I don't think we were initially expecting to get. And so it's afforded us a lot of opportunities. People have reached out to us to get involved with different things. And so one of the things that Kayla and I were able to help out with this year was with ASB East Regional Conference this year. And I'll get into that on the next slide, but they were really focused on some of those, tackling some of these more difficult conversations in these research spaces. So as the title suggests, today we're having a community conversation about discussing some of this racial bias and some of these barriers that exist in research spaces. You can do the next slide. So as I said, so we were able to be a part of the ASB East 2020 conference, not only as attendees, but me and Kayla were on the planning committee. So we actually helped organize some of the sessions that ran this year. And it was very important to us. So the theme that they had was taking action in biomechanics. And basically the idea was that they wanted to include sessions that were heavily focused on promoting a shift from just awareness of barriers. I feel like a lot of us know that these barriers exist for Black and Indigenous and people of color in the community of STEM research and teaching, but we're not really talking about how to progress past these barriers and how to create actionable ways to address and overcome these barriers. So it was an important thing for this conference in particular to tackle some of those different subjects from different perspectives, from students, from professors, in a variety of settings. and just to have some of those conversations, just to get them started. We're not going to accomplish or fix everything, but the idea is just to get those conversations started and get people thinking. So this was the planning committee, just for anybody who is curious. I know I personally had a lot of fun working with this group of people, and I think we're staying on to help out with the next ASB East conference, which is going to be fantastic. But yeah, so I just wanted to put it out there just so everyone knows that this is not just Kayla and I's doing. This is a whole planning committee that put together this conference, and really what we're doing is just giving you guys kind of a summary of some of the things that came up in these discussions during this conference. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the BIPOC community in the classroom session that we had. So there was this is the panel of people who spoke in this particular session. And this ranged from students to teachers, and basically just coming from their different perspectives. And there were specific questions that were asked, and all of the panelists were given a chance to respond and just kind of have an open dialogue about some of these things. So we're going to highlight some of those questions and answers that were given. So one of the questions was, what value does diversity bring to the classroom and to the workforce? Some of us feel like that should be an obvious answer, but sometimes the question just needs to be asked. So generally, it just generates more creativity and access to education and knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't be exposed to. Every single person has their own view of the world, and their own understanding of it. And being able to bring that together in the classroom allows for a lot of different creativity and a lot of knowledge that you can access than if you hang out with people who have all the same shared experiences, for the most part, shared experiences that you do, to be able to talk to some different people who have different experiences than yourself. So this encourages us to educate ourselves to learn how other people interact with and understand the world. And just to, kind of remind you that the world really doesn't revolve around just you and your experiences and your viewpoint. There's a lot of other experiences and viewpoints out there. And it's good to get to learn and understand what those are. Some of the quotes, particularly that I really liked from that session by the moderator, Chastity Brown, was that just because people look alike doesn't mean they are alike. And I thought that was a really pertinent thing because Chastity Brown works at Lincoln University, which is a historically Black college or university, so HBCU. And one of the students in particular in that session said that she is a Black student, but when she first got to Lincoln, she kind of went through a culture shock. And for some people, that might be a little bit weird to say, like, well, you're Black and you're going to a HBCU. How is that a culture shock for you? But just because we look alike and we have the same color skin doesn't mean that all of our experiences are the same. And particularly for her, she is actually from the island. So she's not an African American per se. She's not from here. So the culture shock of being at an HBCU and just a environment of mostly those who look like you but aren't necessarily sharing your same experiences, it's still a thing that happens. And so we need to make sure, I think that's something that's important sometimes, that we can assume that experiences are the same just because people look the same, and that's not the case. A couple other things, it takes an intellectual muscle to confront this. So you have to be very intentional to bring diversity into your classroom and to actually use it in the classroom setting. And the whole goal is to make people self-reflective, not to indoctrinate them. So you're really trying to get them to challenge kind of their views of things, is really what your goal is. One of the other questions was, how do you encourage diversity in the classroom? And this really just comes down to learning about your students. And the more that you learn about them, kind of what motivates them or experiences that they have, you can assign their groups to be more diverse based on these interests or these demographics, particularly in like group projects. So it's not just about, putting them in groups by different skin colors, but more about their ethnicity experiences and their worldviews. One of the other ones, what can professors in predominantly white institutions learn from historically Black colleges and universities like Lincoln to increase diversity efforts in the classroom? Again, get to know your students, what motivates them, what encourages them, and use this information to your advantage to help them succeed. One of the other things is not just understanding your students and how to help them, but you have to look at yourself and understand your own culture and how that informs your attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors. And not only that, you also need to understand the teaching culture that you're in to better navigate that environment. And one of the important things that someone said was that cultures are set up by the people within it, not by those outside of it. So in order to, you have to be in that environment to understand it. And then that way you can better pull in other people who are outside of it and help them to better assimilate into that environment and just to better navigate the environment. Also, don't be afraid to use yourself. Talk about your own experiences. Use your story in your pedagogy. Students really take to you sharing and connecting who you are with them instead of kind of just standing behind, kind of a wall and just teaching. So that also helps just to be able to better connect with your students. Kayla's going to take this one.
Yeah, so we also had a session about biomechanics for STEM outreach, which was really cool. And we entitled it Taking Action in Our Communities. So we had some people that were from an organization, a nonprofit organization called Fourth Family. So they shared how they were able to organize themselves and get kids, especially K through 12, involved in STEM, so math and science in particular. And they did this through sports. Right? And so they had hands-on and active-based teaching and learning. And so what they were really trying to do is target those kids that were not, quote unquote, interested in math or science, and really target what was motivating them, right? So tapping into the intrinsic motivation to get their players to understand the game better. And by the game, we're talking about basketball specifically. So Fourth Family uses basketball to try to motivate students and players and get them more interested in science and math. And so biomechanics, they found, was the perfect way to integrate both of those goals, right? So using what the kids know already about basketball and then transitioning that, like, how can we use the information that you know about basketball to make you a better basketball player? Well, the in-between of that is science, is biomechanics, right? Studying how you shoot a free throw, studying how you defend, right? Can all be rebounding, can all be things that you can actually show them and calculate data and then have them, do new biomechanics and improve their game. And so that's really what they're doing with their organization. And another point that John brought up is that you can write IRBs that look at diversity initiatives and study their outcomes. And in this way, they're able to provide evidence that helps them, right? And then also with that evidence, they're able to get funding for their outreach programs, right? And so this is another way that we can integrate science into our outreach, right? Study it, make it something that is worthwhile for the participants of your research, and then also for you to continue the outreach that you want to do. And so a last question that came from this presentation or this session was, how can we integrate STEM into students' motivations and passions and show them that STEM can help them improve those passions? And that's really what the goal is for, I think, biomechanics. I think we can all agree on that, is that we want to make it fun and interesting for people, right? It's really, really easy for math and science to be boring for kids. It's not the most engaging just on a chalkboard or on a whiteboard. But when you have it be interactive, when you have it, tapping into, whatever is interesting the kids these days, if it's improving their TikTok dances, how do we use biomechanics to improve a TikTok dance? Or how do we get the most views out of this on YouTube, or something that's going to motivate them? And it could be any direction, but then you infuse the STEM in there and show them that it can be fun.
Yes. So another session, and this one was one that I actually got to moderate, was about actually looking at BIPOC perspectives in research, and kind of just this idea that diversity infused research is always going to be good science. So this was a phenomenal panel of people who've had experiences, and it kind of all blended together. Mary O'Connor has a lot of experience with health disparities, and there's a lot of different breakdowns. The Movement is Life Caucus, if anybody wants any information about health disparities and some of they have a amazing amount of resources that you can tap into. Just type in Movement is Life Caucus and you'll come to their page. They have a lot of great information, but she was definitely instrumental in helping us kind of set the stage for how these health disparities impact BIPOC people and why this is such a problem. And she's also a very big advocate of interdisciplinary teams, not just by the color of the people, but just about the different ideas that they can bring. And she had a couple of pretty good examples from that, even outside of the race spectrum. Dwayne also has some experience with some sampling that we'll talk about in a second. And then Charisse has actually done some racial disparity research, which is really fantastic as well. So one of the biggest things is that there's just a critical role for diversity in research, and that ultimately interdisciplinary teams are really crucial if you want to get well-rounded ideas into the research. So one of the biggest things that we talked about is that we all have perceptions and biases, and that doesn't mean that they're actually correct. They may not be the most accurate. And sometimes that can affect your research work, particularly when it comes to some of the conclusions that you're trying to draw, because you're going to project them through your own filter. So if you're working on a study team, but you only have one person who is coming up with the conclusions without any input from anyone else, it could tend to be a skewed thing because they're only looking at it from their filter. And this is why they're saying that the perspective of the senior investigator can make a big impact, because a lot of times the senior investigator is the one who kind of helps to hone in the conclusions that you're going to draw from these studies that you're doing. And Mary O'Connor refers to this as the power of the pen. So having infusing a lot of diversity within your team is going to be an important thing, as well as the perspective of that senior investigator, who is the main one making a lot of the decisions for the group project. One of the other things that came up is having more intentional discussions about study design, not always just going for what's convenient. Examples of this could be with sampling. We know that a lot of times when we do studies, we're just doing them on our healthy college-age students, but what do those demographics look like? Most of the time, you might get a lot of white males or white females. It's a lot harder sometimes to recruit people of color to your studies. I have experience with that myself, because I did some of my research work at my PhD was with diabetes. And we know that there's racial disparities in diabetes. But it was really hard to recruit people of color with diabetes for my study, because of this distrust of science and healthcare in general, because of this margin of health disparities that we already have. And I know that they were always, whenever I did get a person of color to come in for the study, after having emailed and called them, when they finally saw my face and they were like, oh, it's you that's doing this study, they immediately felt more comfortable. And so it's just something that you might want to think about, again, on your teams, having that, depending on what topic that you're actually trying to cover. If you're trying to get into more diverse perspectives or racial perspectives, again, having that diverse team is going to be a crucial thing. Also, for those who are trying to do things more so out in the community, so again, if you're trying to get with diabetics, or maybe even, I know when we were in North Carolina, we had a lot of rural Hispanic communities that were kind of hesitant as well to do studies. You have to establish trust over time with the community. They really need to know that you are not just here to kind of just experiment on them and then just go on about your business. You need to have like a long-term commitment and know that you are really there to help benefit that community, because that will help to build their trust, that they know that you're not just there for your own work, but you're really there to help their community. And a lot of communities will already have organizations and programs that you can actually get into because they've already established this trust with the community. They have a lot of resources that you can use instead of you having to try to create these all on your own. So getting involved in partnering with community organizations and programs could be really helpful, and just trying to get your foot in the door if you want to do some of this research in these communities, or to increase this engagement and retention of people of color in your research in particular.
Yeah, so the last session that we did that involved like BIPOC topic was talking to students that are in biomechanics and really trying to get at the systemic barriers that were being placed on students in biomechanics, and then talking about how we dismantle those barriers kind of from a bottom-up perspective. I know a lot of talks about, this kind of action taking have been really top down, like what can the administration do, what can the professors do, and we really wanted to try to go, how can the students enable those actions to come to fruition? Like, what is the actual perspective on the ground, so to speak? And we had some really good moderators, student moderators for this session. And we came up with some topics and also some actionable solutions to some of these barriers. And the first one we talked about was imposter syndrome. And so just a brief definition of that, it's when students of marginalized groups feel that their accomplishments or talents have doubt about those accomplishments and talents, and have internalized fear of being exposed as a quote unquote fraud. Right? And so really the first thing that came up when talking about imposter syndrome for BIPOC students is that most students didn't know that they were struggling with this issue. They really, until it was put to them in words, they never had that moment of like, this is something that I've been struggling with. But when you say to them, hey, have you been feeling this way? All of a sudden they're like, yes, these are the exact feelings and thoughts that I've been having this whole time. And so being able to even just bring it up as a topic of discussion could be helpful and beneficial to people. And then some actionable solutions for imposter syndrome. We have celebrating small victories, right? And so, not everything is going to be a major accomplishment, going from, let's talk about grades, right? If your goal was to get, an A in the class and you got a B in the class, I mean, that's still a victory. You got to take it where you can get it, right? You don't always, you can reach for the stars kind of thing, right? But you don't always get there. And the hard work that you put in to get to wherever you got is something that you should celebrate. So small victories. And then therapy outside for an outside perspective is also something that was discussed. So a lot of times having that internalized fear and just not being able to bring it up or discuss it with anybody can kind of send you, spiraling a little bit. And so having somebody who is there to listen to you, so really utilizing either counseling that the school provides or an outside therapist to give you an outside perspective of how much progress and how well you actually are doing. And we also talked about first generation status. And so this is when a student is the first one in their family to go to a college or university. And so really what the problem with this barrier is that there's a fear of messing up because they can't financially afford to make a mistake. A lot of times the pressure of being the first and the only, and maybe their parents or their families have saved up all this money for them to go to college, or they've worked really hard in school to get academic scholarships, or they've worked really hard in their sport to get a sports scholarship and it's their athletic scholarship. There's a lot of pressure of not being able to mess up for fear of being kicked out. And then also the lack of representation also contributes to that fear of intensity. So, they're the first and they're the only, and they don't really know anybody that's like them. And so feeling like they're all alone, and not being able to share that experience with anybody else is a problem. And so some actionable solutions that we have for this first generation barrier is that being able to have constant affirmations for themselves, and that can come either from within or from without. So there could be others. You could have a community of people that give you affirmations, and affirmations just mean positive feedback. And so you can give that to yourself, but there's also sometimes where you need it from other people. So if you know or see somebody struggling, if you're friends with them or they're in your class and you happen to know this information about them, just being able to give some good feedback on how they're doing, and being more personable with them could really help. And then with that being personable, having a mentor can provide some good connections for them. So again, with the feeling like they're alone, right? If we have, it could be a student mentor, it could be a professor. It doesn't even have to be a professor that you've had before, but just a professor in general, who would be willing to take on some mentors that have never traversed the college experience or don't have anybody in their family that's done that before, but can provide some connections about, hey, here's a good advisor for you, here's their career fairs coming up, why don't you go take a look at that. Just having somebody to guide them along the way of what they should and shouldn't do, or suggestions of what they should and shouldn't do. And then also, again, therapy was brought up for this instance, grounding purposes. And so college is a lot for anybody, but especially if you don't have any idea of what you're getting yourself into, it can kind of spin out of control with having to manage your own schedule, with having to, feed yourself, do your own laundry, all this other things that come with the college experience, and just having some place that you can always go to, like once a week or once a month or whatever the timeline needs to be, to ground yourself and know that you're okay, and you get a good recap of things that you want to accomplish and then move forward. We also talked about lack of cultural awareness from institutional leaders. And I think that one just kind of speaks for itself. Just there not being a diverse enough environment, and then the institutional leaders therefore don't have a good perspective of all the cultures that are in their institution. And then actionable solutions for that would be some greater efforts to get to know people. So some good things that you can integrate are social gatherings at the faculty and student level. So just bringing people together would help to get some awareness of the different cultures that are involved in your institution. You can do team building activities for the lab or for the college or for whatever organization or student group that's going on. And then ultimately, all these things, you want to find common ground. We all have it. There's similarities between us all, especially if you're doing things within your own college or within your own lab. There's something that brings us together, and you can kind of build off of that, and find the goodness in your diversity. And then culturally aware mentorship is something that is also good to have and will bring about more cultural awareness in the institution. So having mentors that speak up for BIPOC students, and help avoid that power imbalance when confronting issues that have to deal with either racial bias or any kind of barriers that the BIPOC students may be feeling. Right, so just having somebody on their side is something that could really be beneficial. Tokenism is another topic that we talked about. And so definition of this one for us was students from marginalized groups were used as symbolic representation of diversity and inclusion. And this happens almost everywhere. I've seen it in the institutions that I've been in. I've been used as that, token person in places. And so some actionable solutions for this is utilizing and creating student organizations as support groups. So if there's already organizations that are established at your institution, like some institutions have the Centers for Black Culture. Those are great places where you can not just feel like you're the only one. You know, there's different multicultural centers and organizations that the institutions sometimes have. So just being able to have the students gather and get to know one another and just feel like they aren't the only one in a situation is great. Also, using the institution's promotional materials to empower and not exploit students. And that's kind of like a top-down thing, but from the bottom up, we kind of just want to raise awareness or bring awareness to your, PI, or bring awareness to your dean, or bring awareness, to your president, or whoever it is that you feel like has the, authority on, what gets out into the media, of, really using that material, not just for the university's benefit, but for the students' benefit also, right? And then the last one is training. So providing training and practice for bringing up issues, and that can really help others learn, and then also be able to educate others about the perspectives of BIPOC students. And so this is a big one. And I think more places are starting to input this now, but microaggressions training is a great thing to have be brought up, and we'll talk about microaggressions in the breakout session if you come to it. But being able to practice those situations in a safe and comfortable environment, so when they actually do come up, you're not putting your scholarship on the line, or you're not putting your job on the line to be able to talk to your colleagues or your superiors about these kind of issues. And then we also talked about having a lack of role models. And so it's really important that we kind of teach and mentor people about how to be a good role model to people who don't look like you. And so a thing that often happens in institutions, especially predominantly white institutions, is that the Black students go to the Black professors, and they may only be 5 Black professors, and those 5 Black professors can't handle 100+ students. And so we need other mentors. We need to feel safe going to those mentors as well. And so having a good role model that doesn't look like you, but can help you out in situations and will be an ally for you. And also having a balance between visibility and taking on too much. And really, this is something that can happen both at the student level and the mentor level, frankly, is that, you feel like you want to represent and be there for all your students, or you, as a student, you feel like you want to represent and be there for all your fellow students. But you're only one person. And so we you can't do it all. And so you really have to kind of find that balance, and having more people on your side will help kind of share the load or lighten the load. And so kind of that goes into the actionable solutions there, right? Having mentors within and across different roles to help ease the burden, and creating environments of support, right? So showing students that you authentically care and are invested in how they succeed. Right, so you're not just there to give them a grade, you're there to help them understand the material, because the material is what they need to succeed outside of your classroom. And then rewarding efforts in mentoring is, I know, something that we talked about, especially at the ASB annual meeting, is that in order for there to be more mentors, sometimes that there needs to be rewards for those efforts, so that there can be more people that mentor, so that people can feel like the time that they're taking to mentor is actually, progressing them in some way as well. And so that has to, again, kind of come from the top down, but it's something that you'd, want to push for your mentors. It's like, hey, I really appreciate that you've been taking all this time with me. Is there any way that I can nominate you for something? There could be something that we can give back here, some give and take. And then the last one that's going to tie into what we go over in a few minutes is implicit and explicit bias, right? And so there's things that we can, our thoughts and feelings that we can, unconsciously or consciously be putting on other people and having behaviors that impact other people in a negative way. And so some actionable solutions for these would be being comfortable and being able to sit in moments where you notice your biases are resurfacing. And so this is a really good one to have a pause. And I'm not sure who originated that thought. That was not mine, but being able to pause is a really good one before you react to something, basically. Right. And so if there's a situation where you feel like, oh, I really want to say this, or you get interrupted, and you want to have a quick retort or something, being able to take that moment and really, analyze your thoughts and formulate a response that's appropriate. Also being cognizant of positions of power. There's a lot of dynamics that go on, especially in a research setting, right? So undergrads to graduate, graduate to postdoc, postdoc to faculty. Just being able to recognize your position of power and then having humility when you communicate to people that are underneath or below your position is really something that you have to keep in mind. And then approaching problems and conversations by meeting people where they are, right? So not everyone is going to have a full understanding of what an explicit or an implicit bias is. Not everyone knows what a microaggression is. Not everyone, knows all of these topics of discrimination, but they may be doing them, inadvertently. And so just being able to approach a conversation and be like, hey, I think you did X, Y, and Z. This made me feel this way. Can we talk about it? Instead of being like, you're so racist, blah, 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 right? So you don't want to come from a confrontational point ever, but also, just starting at the ground level of being like, hey, this is what actually happened. Here's how I felt about it. Can we talk is a good way to approach those conversations. And then some top-down encouragement to address these biases is also something that, kept being brought up in the conversation of like, we really have some good ideas and we want our administration and our institution to follow our lead on how we think these things should be brought into flourishing. And so we need to have more conversations. And this is a really good way to kind of address some of these barriers is just by talking about them, making people aware of them. There also needs to be a commitment of an ongoing process. It's really nice if your institution put out a statement that they're anti-racist, but are they doing anti-racist work? Will they continue to do anti-racist work? Is any of this being able to have some actionable, repercussions or actionable, I guess, future goals, or is there anything in the works? And then formalizing, yeah, there it is, formalizing courses and trainings. And so there's a lot of work now, I think, thinking about how do we incorporate this knowledge into our curriculum. So creating courses that will help students, especially in the health and in the health sciences kind of arena, and even in the biomedical arena. And then trainings, so we can always, have more trainings about racial biases or about any kind of biases, really. But having some trainings at the top of the semester or at the beginning of the year to kind of give people a refresher of like, here's what we expect in the workplace, and here's how you deal with these kind of problems. And so those are always great things to have to kind of combat those kind of barriers about biases that people may or may not know they have. All right, and so this is the portion where we want you to test your own implicit bias. And we're going to do this using a tool by Project Implicit, which is a nonprofit organization that is also a research collaboration with a couple universities in the US. And their goal is to educate people in the public about their hidden biases. And so we're going to take an implicit associations test, or an IAT, which is your way to self-report your attitudes and beliefs about either topics of race or skin tone. So you'll have 2 tests that you can choose from. And so it'll either be the one called race IAT or the one called skin tone IAT. And the website to do this is the implicit.harvard.edu site, which I think Sarah's going to drop in the chat. Cool. All right, so we'll have about, how long do we say, Sarah?
I think each test takes 5 to 10 minutes. So I encourage everyone, while they're taking it, if they want to mute their mics and turn off their video cameras so they can kind of focus on that. And then we'll be splitting into breakout rooms, if that's okay, to discuss the results of the implicit bias test. So maybe come back in about 5-10 minutes whenever your test is done, and we'll split everyone into breakout rooms.
Oh, good.
And thank you for that, Kayla and Erica. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Thanks for inviting us.
I'm going to pause recording while we take the test.
So we want to do some breakout rooms to talk about it. But first, we just want to say thank you from Erica and I, and also from Matt, for the organization, the International Latinx and Biomechanics. Thanks for having us. And also thank you guys for hearing us, and hope you got something out of it and you can take back to your institution or organization and just try to make things better. If you want to follow us or become a member of the Black Biomechanists Association, our membership link is up there. And also we have an email, general email, and then you can also find all of us at our respective institutions if you feel like you want a more personal messaging. But yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us. Like I said.
Thank you both so much. This was just an incredible summary of a lot of work that went into that huge conference. And yeah, it was just incredibly helpful. Should we post the links to the breakout rooms by group, or do you want to do breakout rooms within this keynote? Do you have a preference?
Us? I don't know.
Maybe since we're running just a little bit late on time, we can go into our different breakout rooms for microaggressions for Latinx and biomechanics, and then for our main group of discussing what we can do and more actionable items, although Kayla's already provided a lot. Yeah, does that sound good to everybody?
Works for me.
Yeah.
Perfect. In that case, it looks like Anna just posted the 3 different breakout rooms. Feel free to jump in to different ones, or stay here and we'll talk about ways to try and create actionable change.
Thank you so much again. And hopefully you guys will join the breakout rooms or stay here. All right, I will stop the recording.